Hey guys, today I'm here with Inessa, who has an absolutely incredible YouTube channel called Inessa S, where she factually and objectively translates hundreds of President Vladimir Putin's videos. Thanks so much for joining me, Inessa.
Hello, hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited for this interview because I've been watching your channel for a long time. So I know in one of the videos you made, you mentioned that it takes you several hours to translate each of the videos. So what motivates you to put in all of that work?
I guess very similar reasons to as to why you have a channel, and I've had a look through a lot of your work as well. You do some very interesting things.
Thank you.
So when it comes down to it, it's just without sounding like a keyboard warrior, but like just a sense of justice, really,
Yeah.
because as a bilingual person, it's very easy for me to spot often very subtle um, even mistranslations,
Right.
just very subtle differences in tone and what was meant. And I was just thinking to myself at one point, this can't go on. If no
Yeah.
one else is going to do it, then I'll do it. And of course, I had no idea that people would actually see it in the vast amounts that they have. So yeah, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself,
Exactly.
right?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised, especially with the whole Russian hacker accusation, how many people in the United States are interested in what is actually going on in Russia and what Vladimir Putin is actually saying. And they're looking for videos that are not heavily edited or might have different translations that completely misconstrue what was actually said. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's
yeah.
I get that feedback a lot actually because I find people don't like to see like a voiceover. Some people do, but most people say they don't like a voiceover
Yeah,
because
I don't.
they can't read body language. They can't piece it together. They're like, well, is that what he's actually saying? But if you can read the subtitle, you can pretty much tell
Hmm.
if it's more or less what he's saying. Yeah, that's where I come in.
Yeah, so in your opinion, do you believe that Vladimir Putin is misrepresented by the US, the more the mainstream media, and if so, how?
I think he's very misrepresented by the media, and that goes back to, I guess, Russia and the US having opposing national interests, and
Right.
that's just how it is. It's not going to be any different. Of course, it doesn't have to be as aggressive as it is now, um, but I guess the US has been a hegemon for so long now that they can't accept. When I say they, like, don't don't perceive that to be people or even majority of the government. It's mostly just this deep state gang that doesn't let anyone do their job properly.
Right. Yeah, so then would you believe that the misrepresentation obviously is quite deliberate then? They want to create a narrative of him and Russia and show it to us and make us believe it while it's quite false.
Absolutely, and because I guess he's been in power for so long, that makes him an easier target. Um, because of course, in the states, figureheads change, the policy doesn't change. In Russia, it's a little bit different, and the person maybe hasn't changed, but at least you know who's responsible. You know
Hmm.
who to go. In like a Western democratic country, somebody does some funny business, and then they're out up to 4 years.
Hmm.
They're not responsible for anything anymore. So that kind of system, it actually obliterates responsibility. Um,
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
yeah, and I grew up in New Zealand. We have the same problem as it is in the States, as it is in England, any Western country really. So a person will do something, they'll put a policy through, and then they'll leave, and then nobody can hold them responsible for anything. If you go back 15 years, um, we can already see then that things started forming then with deliberate misrepresentations of Russia and Putin because he wasn't necessarily following the agenda of the day. He did it very slowly, so as not to upset anyone. But as time went on, he had a lot more bold decisions. For example, the
Hmm.
Crimea, things like that. And that's when if I can swear on your channel, when shit really hit the fan.
Yeah.
That's when newspapers and everything went really crazy. And of
Hmm.
course, Western mainstream media is entirely linked with think tanks that develop foreign policy, so they can't say anything different to the official line. And when you have real journalism, pretty much nobody ever reads it, nobody sees it because it just gets shunned. I have seen some great pieces of journalism, US journalism, but unfortunately, people either don't read very much, they read headlines and then move on.
Yeah,
It doesn't really.
a lot of it isn't spotlighted because there seems to be this growing movement of journalists in the mainstream media who are less about reporting facts and staying true to journalism, and they're more like political activists, and they're deliberately trying to get a narrative across, whether it be true or not. It just, they want it to fit in with their entire narrative. But something interesting, you mentioned how they've started, a while ago, trying to paint Putin in a bad light. It's interesting if you even look at entertainment, a lot of the thriller, like action movies that come out, a lot of the or political thrillers, a lot of the bad people are always Russians. So it's just
Yeah,
funny. There are so many where it's the Russians are the bad guys.
yeah. Like I went to, was it the new Fast and Furious
Oh, I didn't
recently?
see it yet.
I've forgotten the name, and I was expecting, fast cars and a lot of butts or whatever. But even there, you have Americans, you have a Russian base of some sort, and of course, the Russians are the bad guys. And I'm just like, even here, it's such a beat up program. I just, I
Hmm.
can't help but feel like I've already seen this movie somewhere else.
Yeah.
So no, it's always the Russians, the bad guys, and I can only bring it down to this again, this like this national interest thing, diametrically opposed. Really, you can be friendly, but you can never pursue the same goals, I guess.
Yes.
Sorry.
And it's also a way of hitting all the bases because not everyone is involved in politics or really knows what's going on. So it's a way that, even the youth who aren't interested in politics can kind of be indoctrinated in that way. Russia equals bad, if you're seeing it over and over and over again. So that was interesting. Kind of on that note, what's your opinion of the Russians hacked the US election accusation? And what do people outside of the US that you've maybe talked to, what did they think about it in general?
I think to believe that Russians hacked the elections, you would realistically have to believe that Trump and the Russian government know each other. Now, this is denied at every level. He's never been to Russia besides a business trip sometime, I don't think it was late 90s or early 2000s. But many business people go to Russia. It actually has a
Exactly.
very large expat community. I just came from Moscow last month. I spoke mostly English with people because there's a very large business community. People go there, a lot of people go there from the States, and this is kind of shunned because the government, your government, unfortunately, doesn't want you to go there. They don't want you to see the people live absolutely normal lives. And when Americans go there, they love it. So to believe that Russia hacked the elections would mean you believe Trump has some sort of deal with the Russian government when that's absolutely not the case. And actually, in Russian news, they're very much looking forward to Putin meeting Trump officially, which
Mm.
I think is going to happen in July, so this coming month. So, from my perspective, I don't believe that Russia hacked the elections. And, you know, just with any question, when you're trying to find something out, you look for an incentive. What would be the incentive? So either way, you're going to deal with huge deep state. You're going to deal with America's military industrial problem. There is nothing that one or the other candidate can really win you.
Hmm.
So from my perspective, I don't believe that happened, and it's actually kind of insulting to the American people to think that you can influence the election
Hmm.
by twitching things here and there and having a whole country just
Yeah,
stand there.
that's true. And that's not to even mention that they've presented no actual hard evidence to
No,
support this accusation. And it's just, some anonymous sources and things like that. So it
it's always a specialist that is unknown. And
exactly. And to present it as fact, which some mainstream media outlets do, is completely unbelievable. I
I
mean,
would,
because the gravity of that accusation and to
you know,
is enormous.
I agree with this. I don't even mention this argument anymore because people have like forgotten what evidence is. But they do this all the time. If you think about the chain of events that have been anti-Russian, anti-Putin, and we're not going to get into each of them now because each story can be discussed in its own separate way. But you know, the MH17 disaster with the airplane, you know, the Panama scandal.
Oh,
Even
yes.
Putin was never directly implicated, but other world leaders were. Um, and that had Putin's face like right on the front cover in
Hmm.
it. So it's just about visual cues and headlines because that's all people read. They often don't read the whole article. And so long as it's implanted in your head, then that's enough. The seed is planted. No one is going to have any question because that's just how people work, I guess. So evidence, what evidence? That's for lawyers. You know,
Yeah.
journalists, they don't have it anymore.
So Megyn Kelly, who works for NBC now, she recently interviewed Putin about the Russians hacking the U.S. election, among other things. But apparently, the interview that NBC ended up broadcasting was heavily edited. Can you please talk a little bit about that? Namely, what are some of the most important points, in your opinion, that NBC either edited out, or in what way they might have misconstrued Putin in that interview?
Yeah, so the Megyn Kelly interview, the the whole interview in Russian is about 20 minutes long. I went on the NBC YouTube channel and I had a look, and it was something like 11 or 13 minutes. So I thought,
Hmm.
hang on, that's unusual. What have they done here? And basically, just from memory, they had cut out all the bits that made Putin look remotely in the positive light, especially towards the end when Megan says, you know, I've been in St. Petersburg. Everyone that I've asked, they only have good things to say about you. What do you think about that? They had just completely cut that part out because in America, people must believe that, you know, Putin is a tyrant, he's a dictator.
Hmm.
Nobody speaks out against him because Russians are afraid when, you know, that's absolutely not the case. So I had noticed that and I left them a little comment.
I saw your comment when I went to that. It was like, this isn't the full interview.
I couldn't walk past. And of course, a couple of days later, they had blocked the interview on my channel, like my version of it with my
Hmm.
subtitles, which is actually illegal because, as you know, YouTube has copyright laws. And, but when you add something new to an existing fair use item, such as translation, it becomes a derivative work, which is why I can do what I do because
Hmm.
I take something that exists and I add my own translation work to it, which
Hmm.
means it becomes mine. So sometimes people will go and block your content, but then you appeal it and they unblock it because they made a mistake. So I tried doing that with NBC, but you know, no can do. They're a
Hmm.
giant corporation, and
Interesting.
yeah, so it was against their interests that one. I'm not saying I made some big, you know, big deal about it, but it's definitely not easily available if someone is trying to
Yes.
find.
Actually, the link you sent me for me to watch it, I was reading the comments underneath, and some people said that that wasn't even the full interview, and this one was linked on Facebook. So I'm not sure where to even get the full interview at this point, but it's.
I had left out bits that NBC had actually covered,
Mhm.
just to strain my own time. As I say, 20-minute interview it would take me like a couple of hours to do. So I only did the bits that NBC had actually left out. To people that had seen the original. But the full one, I don't think full one exists in English.
Okay. All
I'll
right.
try to do. I'll try to do that next time.
That'd be awesome. I'd love to watch it. So I thought it was interesting when you mentioned that Megyn Kelly said that she was going around talking to people, and a lot of people were very positive, spoke positively of Putin. Doesn't he have a very incredibly high approval rating in Russia? And I think I remember reading it was something like the upper 80s or the lower 90s, like extremely high.
That's right, and I think the latest poll is something like 89%. But again, what people will tell you is the polls are fake.
Right, he's rigging the polls and he's a dictator and
Yeah,
everyone's too scared to speak out against him.
it's a Kremlin poll and it's
Yeah.
aired on national channel, so you can't trust that. Blah blah blah. I mean, margin for error is with everything, but more or less, I think it's about 89 to 90%, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to foreign policy. I think he's got a little more position in internal policy, but when it comes to foreign policy, I don't think anyone um, blows everyone out of the water. I don't
Hmm.
think anyone can compete in this presidential run.
Yeah, so that's obviously a huge misconception, in your opinion, then, that Americans have of Vladimir Putin. Are there any others you can think of off the top of your head that just,
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans and Westerners in general believe that Putin runs Russia alone, like with an iron fist sort of
Mhm.
thing, kind of akin to, Gaddafi or someone like that. Um, and while, I have my own opinions about Gaddafi, which differ from mainstream media, blah, 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 but it's definitely not the case. Putin is just one man. Yes, he does have a decisive word should that be required. But Russia has a parliament. They get a draft bill. It goes through parliament and gets voted on. If parliament decides it's going to pass, then it passes. If not, then not.
Mhm.
This recently with the domestic violence. Basically, what happened was it was just domestic violence laws getting modernized. Them were a lot more harsh than crimes that were a lot worse, for example. So all that happened is they brought it into harmony with some other laws, which made some sentences seem not as harsh as before. But that's all, like nothing to do with hating women.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I saw headlines in the Guardian and everything saying Putin just allowed domestic violence and things like that.
Yeah.
Personally, it has nothing to do with Putin. All he does at the end is probably just sign the law into action. Any further has nothing to do with his decision making at all. We have a democratic parliament like any other country. So that kind of misconception that everything is run by one person is absolutely not true. Same with things like when corruption happens or when ministers, high-ranking ministers, it's not Putin's fault. This is a person that made a decision that was wrong. So I think that's one of the highest misconceptions.
And at this point, like after everything that's transpired between the U.S. and Russia, all the back and forth, what is the average opinion? What's the average Russian's opinion of Americans right now? Probably pretty bad.
No, I think, you know, Russians, they differentiate between American people.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, and, we're all people. We all pretty much want the same things universally. But when it comes to the American government, I guess the Russian media has a field day as well in terms of, there are some really funny characters in the US State Department, for example.
Uh-huh.
Jen Psaki, Mark Toner, or Kirby, or I can't remember the new one. And they come up with some really funny things to say. And I guess it's to be expected because you cannot possibly justify some of the things that they need to justify. So when they say these funny things, it gets aired in Russian media and spun around, and people have a field day with it, basically. So the feeling that I got is people are very welcoming to Americans in Russia, but only to tell them like their side of the story. Why are you doing these crazy things? This is how we feel, blah blah blah. But as for government, I think, yeah, it's, for lack of a better word, and without wanting to offend anyone, it's a little bit of a laughing stock, especially when it comes to spokespeople, because a lot of the times they're just completely nonsensical, and they have one comment, which is no comment to pretty much everything. So
Yep.
yeah,
Well, as long as they keep peddling this Russian hackers, theory without proper evidence, then I can see why that would be
yeah, and how many times can you really play the same trumpet, so to speak? So
over and over, over and over.
yeah, and it's going to be interesting coming up to the presidential election in Russia in 2018. So it'll be interesting to watch the American media then, what they're saying, how many people Putin's killing and all that stuff. So
Yeah. Well, kind of on that note, there was following the U.S. shooting down of a Syrian Air Force jet in Syria's airspace. Russia has said that it will treat U.S. warplanes operating in parts of Syria where its air forces are also present as targets. In your opinion, do you think that the U.S. and Russia, how close are they to an actual physical conflict? Do you think that World War III is a possibility?
I don't think so at this stage. Same thing happened when a few months ago the U.S. did a very similar thing, and they went and what happened? They bombed a Syrian airport.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, and Russia had ceased the memorandum that was in place, which prevented airspace incidents between the U.S. and Russia. So much like now, I think this is just like a primary response, something that they do when the other side does something that they weren't supposed to do. So, it has a bit of an effect when it goes through the media and people see it on TV. I don't think at a government level there's going to be a major war, at least not at the moment. But the U.S. is a little bit things they're doing. So
Yeah, well, I mean, you can tell that the deep state is obviously very interested in a war with Russia.
you notice Trump does these things, the whole Russiagate thing suddenly goes away. So, when you go and bomb Syria, all of a sudden it's like, yay, Trump. But if you're
Hmm.
not bombing anyone, it's like, oh, Trump is colluding with the Russians. So, I think, and Russia,
It doesn't make sense.
it doesn't make sense, but you also get a sense of what's going on behind closed doors there, what's not being said, who is he fighting against internally, actually, in the US. So, as they say, I think, for you guys, the bigger enemy is probably on the inside. I would.
Our country is so divided at this point. And in Trump, it's not so easy as him just wanting to do something and being able to get it done. He's hindered and, blocked at every point. Like, still, I mean, that's not going to give him an excuse saying he doesn't have to get anything done. He still, needs to fulfill the promises he made during his campaign. But you can cut him a little slack knowing that there is, as you said, this war raging behind the curtain that none of us are privy to. So that is definitely something worth considering.
Congress just recently passed a new batch of sanctions against Russia, which Trump was actually against. So, you have this whole parliament that's wanting sanctions based on absolutely nothing at all. It's just to reprimand someone that, in their view, is not
Hmm.
behaving. So you have one person against the whole Congress and Senate.
Yep.
Just do what they feel is right. So of course his decision making is very limited.
I mean, we'll see what happens throughout the next couple years. Hopefully, he can clean some of it out. Fingers crossed. So I'm curious how often you're accused of being a Russian agent, because I imagine that helming the channel you do, you're accused very often. Whenever I would speak out against the Russian hacker theory, I was accused of being a Russian agent, and many people in the same network that I'm in. But I'm sure you get it a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. On the daily, I would say, it seems that just if your varies from the mainstream, then you must be an agent of some sort.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously, having a channel like mine, which being very niche, I understand it may look like some kind of operation propaganda. I don't know, but people often come and they'll spew their ignorance, and you get used to it, But
Yeah.
how many times I've been told it on the daily, 5 times a day.
That's
I
really
think it's
funny.
my middle name now.
Well, have you even ever seen Putin or met him in person?
No, I have absolutely no ties to the Russian government. The only thing I have is the language. That's pretty much it. Language and a sense of justice. I just couldn't watch
Yes.
TV anymore because it became so ridiculous. I ended up throwing it away, the TV, um, because I just, I thought, why would I waste my
Yeah.
time watching something that's so misconstrued? Yes. No, I've never met anyone, but, maybe in the future.
Do you believe as a whole that Vladimir Putin's leadership has been a positive thing for Russia?
I personally do, but you will find that opinions vary based on how old that person is. So at the moment, there is a little bit of internal opposition because of kids who are under 20. They're being led by this guy called Navalny, who's not very good, but that's another story. Um, so as someone that grew up in the 90s, being a kid of the 90s, I remember that country very well, and it's not the same country that it is today. So I personally would never like to see it in that state again. So for me, because I have had that experience, I do think that Putin has been instrumental for Russia. Really, there was a point in time when I thought that maybe I would never go back there ever again because things were very dire. Um, but I'm very happy to say that that didn't happen, and I attribute a lot of it to Putin's policymaking.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of I've watched a few documentaries on it, and Russia was, as you said, in a really dire position when he was, took on the leadership there. So I think a lot of people maybe aren't aware of the history and how bad it was. Well, as I was talking to you before this interview, we have actual people advocating for communism seriously in this country right now, quite a lot of people. So I guess maybe some of these people wouldn't care even if they knew.
I think the Russian diaspora is one of the largest in the world, so it's one of the largest immigration communities in the world outside of Russia. So I think there's about 25 million Russians who don't live in Russia, not counting the closer abroad like Ukraine and the former republics. And a lot of it happened during the 90s when the country just completely collapsed, myself included. So now you have all these Russians that are kind of lost in the middle. Um, and, that is why. So, yeah.
Okay, so to kind of wrap up, my last question then is, I'm curious in your own words what the main goal of your channel is. So what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I'm starting to get away of people who are interested in Russian foreign policy at an official high level. So I do not only Putin, I do also Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense speeches and addresses. So I guess I'd like just to become someone that if people are interested, they know where to go to find the exact information that hasn't been highly edited by a Western journalist. I don't mean that disrespectfully. Unfortunately, the only information that does come through to sources of mainstream media, oftentimes it's not what's being said at all. Well, for me, it's very important to remain as authentic as possible, which does mean being very careful with my translations because, as I said before, translation subtleties can be very, very subtle. So if you use the wrong word, it can actually change the whole meaning. So, well, I'm not perfect, but I certainly don't have any bad intentions when I'm doing it. So someone that does have bad intentions, I assume it's very easy to make up a whole story that isn't even there.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, it's been so great having you. I've come to the end of my questions now, but yeah, it was so great to finally meet you and talk to you in person. Where's the best place for people watching to find out about your YouTube channel, like Facebook, Twitter? Are these all?
Yeah, it's just my name on YouTube. I think if you search my name or if you search Putin anything, I'm pretty much the only thing that comes up.
Okay, great. I'll link your channel and your Facebook and Twitter below so people can find it easily. Definitely check out her channel. Really, it's amazing. Yeah, so great. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. And thank you once again, Inessa. It's been awesome having you.
Thank you so much. We'll chat again soon.
Yeah, definitely.